Social media giant Facebook remains in the spotlight for better or worse. We're joined right now by Senator Mark Warner. He's been advocating for social media competition and also pushing back on Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook's political advertising policies. Senator Warren joins us right now from Washington this morning. And Senator, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So your big problem in terms of privacy is what? To explain from the social media perspective and then explain from the broader perspective of what's happening in technology and privacy right now.
Well, I'd step back. I think that for a decade plus, we had this almost over-the-top techno-optimism. It was reflected in both political parties, Republicans generally pro-business, the Obama administration infatuated with Silicon Valley. We saw these companies do great innovative things, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Googles of the world. And we kind of refused to acknowledge with all of the communities they were building, there was a dark underbelly that was being created as well. An underbelly that allowed a country like Russia to come in and completely catch the companies and our government off guard and interfere in our elections using social media trolls, bots, and a series of fake accounts. We've seen an accumulation of power in companies that I think we've frankly not seen since the beginning of the 20th century when Teddy Roosevelt came in with the trust busters. And we're 3.5 years later, and Congress has still not acted from the most basic things like having the same kind of political disclosure for political ads on social media that would take place on CNBC, or some basic rules of the road around privacy or other pro-competitive aspects in this industry. And America's failure to act has meant that we've ceded that leadership, in many cases to Europe on privacy, to the Brits and Australians on content, to individual states like California. And I don't think that is a good scenario for our country. And I candidly think that even the social media companies realize that they're kind of playing rope-a-dope with Congress and playing on Congress's inefficiency, and not acting is in the end going to come back and bite them, because when we do set rules of the road, they'll be, I think, a bit tougher.
Maybe playing on Congress's inability to act, but also playing on the idea that the right and the left can't agree on just about anything right now.
But this is an area, for the most part, I've got a series of bipartisan bills I laid out over a year ago, a white paper with 20-plus ideas. Every piece of legislation I've introduced in this realm has been bipartisan. I actually think this may be that sweet spot where there may be that ability to not make this a Democrat, Republican, or left-right, but a future past kind of issue. So very briefly, the bills that I've laid out, a couple of them, one would be, let's go ahead and have the same disclosure requirements for political ads on social media.
Like it would be very common sense.
Common sense.
I think logic, just catching up with technology. It's moving.
I think
it'd
get 80 votes. I think it would get 80 votes. Another bill I've got, because I think we need more transparency, this one with Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, says we ought to know what data is being collected about us, and we ought to know what it's worth, so consumers start to understand, Facebook and Google are not free. They are giant sucking sounds of data from us that they then monetize. Nothing wrong with that, but consumers ought to know what the value of what they're giving up.
I agree with that 100%. And let's just take a look at something we saw in the news this week. Okay. That would be Google and its partnered up with Ascension, which is a hospital chain. It's got, I think, 150 Google employees who have seen information on patients, all kinds of sensitive information for tens of millions of patients who have come through those doors. It's not a violation of HIPAA because they're working on tools to try and make it more accessible for doctors. However, no patients know about this or knew about it until the Wall Street Journal reported about it. None of the doctors knew about this. And that seems like an area that is ripe for this. How quickly can you enact? If you've got bipartisan support, how quickly can you do something about this?
Well, logical things, this is a news flash, but logical things that are common sense don't always happen in Washington. But the Google case was a perfect example. We've got two competing tensions. We all know the power of data to bring about healthcare reform is really important. Mm-hmm. The whole basis of electronic medical records.
But this doesn't have to be done without anybody's consent.
But that's your point. That's exactly the point. Should it be done without consent? And should it be done where we're frankly empowering one of the already dominant platforms without any competition? That brings me to another piece of legislation I've got that says, shouldn't we be able, if we're tired of how we're treated on Google or Facebook, be easily able to move our data, make it portable to a new site? So you can move all your data plus your cat videos to Nuco if you get tired of how you're treated. That was a similar model. I was a telecom guy that we had in the telephony industry where we had number portability. And if you have data portability, you've got to still have interoperability, so you can still talk to the folks who remain on Facebook. Again, think about the different email systems, how they talk to each other. And then we've introduced another concept that says, because chances are these forms of what you're giving away are never going to be understandable in English, let's introduce a concept of delegability. So if you want to delegate, in a sense, to a third party the ability to be guardians of your data, you ought to be able to do that. And then we've got other legislation that starts to look at basic notions of, shouldn't we have a right to know when we're being communicated with on these platforms? Are we talking to a human being or a bot? Now, that's easy to say. It's a little harder technically to do, and there's nothing per se wrong with a bot. But if we want to make consumers informed, they ought to have that tool as well.
Hey, Senator, do you have any issues with this separate report that Google is getting into the banking business, offering checking? That's going to take place apparently next year as part of a project with Citigroup. I asked because obviously when Libra was announced by Facebook, Washington went wild.
Well, I think, again, we're going to see greater use of data in all sectors, including finance. I'm concerned when we've got, whether it's Libra or whether it's the Google proposal around banking, where we have these giant tech platforms entering into new fields before there's some regulatory rules of the road. Because once they get in, the ability to extract them out is going to be virtually impossible. And I think I'm a tech guy. I'm all for innovation. I would rather see new entrants into the market take on these new fields.
I guess the big question is, do you want a Facebook and a Google even in these businesses? This becomes a sort of larger either antitrust question or just size and scale question, and whether the network effects are beneficial or harmful.
I think if we could have rolled back some of the Facebook acquisitions on, Instagram and WhatsApp, if we could have, take a good look at before Google acquires Fitbit, I think we will be. I think there ought to be very strict scrutiny. I'm not willing to say they all ought to be out or they all ought to be broken up yet.
You would block the Fitbit deal?
I think the Fitbit deal needs a high level of scrutiny if we're going to have Google take on, again, all this personal data in a way that the large platform companies have not had a very good record of protecting the data or being transparent with consumers. And I still think, again, I can't totally blame them, because if Congress doesn't set rules of the road, asking them to self-regulate is frankly just not a viable option.
Senator Warner, thank you. It's good to see you, and we hope you come back soon.